We are back. Season 1, Episode 3. The base violence necessary for change. Interesting take on drowning, right at the very beginning, by Silco. Peaceful, but absolutely horrifying. It's a nice little moment, and it does a good job of explaining it. I've actually been drowning before at one point in time in my real life, and I actually still have issues with that to this very day, if I'm being honest with you. Anytime I can't breathe for an extended period of time, and I mean even like 10 seconds, that panic triggers, right? That animal instinct, the thing that Silco is monologuing about. It's hard to describe, and I hope none of you ever understand what that feels like. So, fascinating thing, and obviously Vander's. I'm sorry, that's a little bit of giving it away, but even there in the original thing, I was like, got you. It's Vander's. Cool, that makes perfect sense. Vander's is the one who caused his eye injury and was going to kill him. All right, cool. And it also gives a wonderful insight. In my notes, I just say into evil, because I didn't give his name away at this point. And wonderful insight into Silco's mentality, because the whole time he talks about how grateful he was for it, how much it worked for him, how that's just. And I had a random thought as we were going through this. This is how you write Anders Dragon Age 2. So, obviously, Vi is turning herself in order to sacrifice herself for powder and for everything else. That tracks, makes perfect sense. Which then forces Vander to take her place. I've noticed this episode does several things several times. I'm going to try not to call it every single iteration of it. But the episode starts telling us a lot of the things it's been showing us, or rather the show has been showing us in the previous 2 episodes. In both episode 1 and episode 2, there's a whole lot of good exposition, good presentation, good visual storytelling. And in here, they finally actually say things, which is fine. Again, as I said, there's nothing wrong with both lines about that. Oh yeah, I figured that out too, Imperial Structure, because I noticed he doesn't blink ever. And I wasn't sure I was even noticing that at first, but yeah, he doesn't actually blink. Yeah. So, obviously, Vanders is going to turn himself in. This is a fascinating scene. The Council wants their pound of flesh. Grayson absolutely does not want to do this. Vanders is the only one who's been holding things together. The whole area is on the verge of being screwed up. There is such a thing as being too self-sacrificing. All of these issues, and reckless lack of forethought is what led to all this happening to begin with. Remember, all this started because Vi got a tip about a place she could rob in order to take a job, in order to try and provide for herself and her family as part of a, I think we can handle ourselves now kind of a thing. You know, trying to contribute to her family and her people. That went wrong, which went wrong, which went wrong, which went wrong, which went wrong, and now everything's awful forever. But I bring that up because I'm not trying to, a real job, an adult job. I already kind of mentioned the idea that Vi is already trying to think of herself as someone who is actually functionally an adult, because that's just how life is in this horrible, horrible place that she lives. Cool. And I want you to keep that in mind for reasons that'll be very, very self-apparent to anybody who's actually watched this episode. So, then Grayson gets killed. Just... I have to admit, that surprised me a little bit. Just whoosh, right there, right at the beginning of the episode. Wow. And yeah, just that one-shot smash of her. Just, okay. That's where we're going with this. If I could pause for a second, because this is such an important scene, and it's so understated, and that's awesome that it's so understated. Because here's the deal. If something big happens, you don't need to overstate it. It's big. Right? This is something I've talked about a lot. If you're really powerful, you don't have to demonstrate or flex that power because you're powerful. If you're really in charge, you don't have to demonstrate or try to force other people or puff yourself up because you are in charge. If a moment is a significant moment in a work of fiction, you don't have to oversell it because it is a significant moment of fiction. If I might pull a parallel, I'm going to spoil the 3rd X-Men film really quick here. Because please just trust me on this. Because there's a scene in it which perfectly encapsulates this, right? As usual, I like to demonstrate by opposites. So, spoiler alert for anybody who doesn't want to see that. I don't blame you. That film sucks, but unless you're Savicom. No offense, Savicom. Please don't hate me. God, I hate that film so much. But I'm not actually talking about the bridge scene. I'm actually talking about the scene where Xavier is killed by Phoenix. And that's a big scene. One of the most intelligent and powerful mutants on the planet, who has tremendous political weight and cultural influence, who a lot of people listen to on both sides, who has been a stabilizing force for peace between mutants and everyone else for decades, dies. Now, in the interest of fairness, there's a lot that's done right in that scene. Especially on behalf of, oh my god, I can't think of his name. Ian McKellen, who plays Magneto, who does a really, really good job with that scene. But then there's everything else about that scene. That scene went way too hard and overemphasized. And because of how hard that scene overemphasized itself, with them crying out and holding him and wailing, oh god, it's so horrible, and the dramatic music and everything, and it just overstated itself so hard, and the movie effectively just lingered on that moment for several minutes to try and emphasize the impact, and that's the point. When you do that, in my experience, what you do is you actually diminish the impact, because you hammer it so hard and so often that the audience is like, yeah, okay, I get it. And instead of being like, oh my god, it's more like, all right, you see what I mean, right? Like, I'm describing this so terribly from such a terrible perspective, but it diminishes the impact that the scene should have had. By contrast, Grayson dying is just wham, corpse. Oh, and the only thing we really get from it is Marcus's reaction to that. Everything else is just, but that impacts it. That adds to the impact. That helps emphasize the impact that is there. We've already seen in 2 episodes that Grayson has been desperately, absolutely trying to hold this crap together, right? Along with Vander. Both of them have been doing so much to try and deal with this, and one of the only good enforcers just died. Boom, just like that. That's powerful. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing I wanted to talk about is killing characters in fiction. Now, unlike when I just spoiled X-Men 3, I can't really talk about this. For those of you who know me, I have a rule which I call no unrelated spoilers. So I'm not going to spoil the fact that in, Made Up-a-thon 3005, there's this scene where Bob kills Bobina, but then Bobina was actually his brother the entire time. I'm not going to do that because it's an unrelated spoiler. You know, either you're on stream or you're on the VODs and you come here to talk about Arcane, so I'm not going to spoil Star Trek, I'm not going to spoil Final Fantasy, I'm not going to spoil anything else. You get it, right? So no unrelated spoilers. So I kind of can't talk about character death in examples. But I know you can think in your head of a lot of examples of how character death can be done well and can be done poorly. I do think a tremendous amount of fiction has this fixation on that the only way you can have consequences is by killing. That the only thing that can actually showcase some kind of drama or tragedy or anything like that is the specific kind of thing that involves death. Speaking as a GM and a writer, there's a lot you can do to characters that does not involve killing them. Hell, you can even remove someone from the narrative without killing them, right? But that's the shtick. You want consequences. You want those consequences to be there. And in my experience, the best way to approach that, the best way to approach character death, is to approach it by completely ignoring the concept of character death. Hear me out for a second. There is an example I can think of. I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to talk about it in a way that you're probably going to get figured out if you know what I'm talking about. There's an example of, it's a movie, where the entire movie builds up to this death. And the way I say that, it's so natural and fluid. It follows through on the events of the plot. It follows through on the events of the characters. It follows through on the events of the themes, plural. It's so natural that you don't actually see it coming. Even though it's actually fairly well telegraphed, and if you're watching the second time around, you just see the signs everywhere. Of course it is. But those signs exist because that was the natural path. If you think of the narrative as a road you're walking upon, a path to character death should be a path to character death, if that makes sense, right? The death of Grayson at the beginning of this episode is something that didn't just come out of nowhere. It wasn't a shock value kind of thing. It wasn't shocking. It was very well telegraphed and very well built up to, because of course this was where things were going to lead. Between Silco's manipulations, which we find out his name just a few seconds later, and the position of both the enforcers and the people around her, of course she was going to get killed. So it follows through so naturally and smoothly with all of the themes and the events of the plot, as well as the characters that we've seen so far. Because the kind of people who were more dirty or underhanded are the kind of people who are going to cause this death. That's why Marcus lives. He wasn't in the line of fire. Of course, thematically speaking, the cycle of violence is going to be perpetuated by getting rid of the only people who are stabilizing the system. That's even physically shown, if I could skip forward a little bit, that's physically shown in this episode where we see that the physical manifestation of that cycle of violence, that little energy monocrystal thing, being stabilized in a way by external forces. If those external forces are not stabilizing it, what would have happened? Well, we know what would have happened because we saw that at the end of the episode. So what happens when you remove that stabilizing element? Grayson's dead. And you see what I mean? I feel like they did a really, really good job of making this death stick. And I mention that because when it first happened, I wasn't sure I thought that. I had to really chew on this for a little bit because, well, the other side of this coin, and I kind of hinted at it already, is entirely too much fiction, gets a little bit too kill happy. You could probably think of a few bits of fiction that do exactly that, that treat death a little bit too cheap, a little bit too regular. And when you just kind of stab, and you know, just push your way through your cast like that, it actually diminishes the impact of the deaths to the point where they just kind of become banal or normal. And again, I'm not going to name examples, but I bet you can think of several. So my first thought was we were going that route with it, right? I was just saying, and I'm not even getting into coming back from death. I don't even want to touch that. I don't assume Arcane will be going down that direction. So, Grayson's dead. Okay. Huh. Alright. We finally get the name for the evil guy, Silco. We see Deckard, the second time, or sorry, that's not true, the third time, but we see a little bit more about Deckard and how he is really not doing well. There's several shots, again, not a second of camera time is wasted. There's several shots as everything else is going on of Deckard literally vomiting the shimmer in the background as everything else is going on. Now, I was about to say, Marcus is completely... I love this, by the way. Marcus, the violent, brutish, psychopathic, elitist, corrupt cop, is freaking out over the whole thing. Probably because of Grayson's death. That was a line for him. I mean, she was one of the good ones, after all. Silco just tosses him a bag of gold. And he literally drops the bag of gold, and we literally have blood money. A little overt, I'm not going to lie. That was a little overt. But I've actually been noticing something this entire episode, or rather all 3 episodes. The show is very overt in general. And I don't mind because, as I've said before, execution is what really matters to me. It is very on the nose in several cases. And usually on the nose, visual storytelling or symbolism or anything like that is the thing I would consider bad. But a lot of that can be salvaged by execution, and I think they've been doing a good job of it, so I'm willing to walk over the literal blood money. Yeah, it doesn't treat me like I'm an idiot. It's not like being like, hey, it's not like grabbing the camera, hey, do you get it? Because it's blood money. No, it doesn't do that. It's just there's the blood money scene, and then we move on. Okay, I'm with that. He even throws the gold down on the ground, although I have a feeling he picked it up later. So then, there's this moment where we hear Vi crying. Or rather, more accurately, we don't hear Vi crying. There's a lot of grief in this episode, in character. We're not even talking about in real life. There's some good audio design, as there usually is. We don't hear her. We shouldn't hear her. Instead, we just see her. Because when you probably know, when you're at that level of tears, at that level of grief, you tend to kind of tune everything out. And so, even though the camera is quite away from her, distancing her and showing her as remote and alone, we are audibly being put into her position, which then ties in with the visual representation of showing her as quiet and alone in a giant empty room, which, yeah, very good combination of both audio and visual design in order to put us into the shoes of Vi during that scene. So the tension has peaked, and now we pull it down again for just a second here. Jayce and Viktor are debating what to do. There's a little bit of light banter there. There's another scene of telling what's been shown. This is Jayce's life work. Viktor is willing to go above and beyond. He's got the freaking keys. He's positing the idea of literally robbing the Academy in order to continue their bold experiments. Oh yeah, and crank it. Gotta have the little joke in there. Again, pulling it down. It's that same pacing thing the whole show has been doing. Hey, I can actually show you it this time. Thanks again, Darch Monster. So it's a nice, funny breather scene. But it's also interesting because it's also a really, really typical scene. How many times in fiction have you seen the crazed scientist is pushed by extreme circumstances to test his experiment on him or herself? I don't know why I'm doing gender. I'm doing gender because I'm thinking of Spider-Man 1. I apologize. I'm actually thinking of Green Goblin from Spider-Man 1. But it's a common trope, right? The scientist is pushed. They try their experiment. It goes wrong, and now they're the Hulk, or now they're the Green Goblin, or there's a dozen. There's 100 examples of this type of thing. It's a very, very common trope, but that's been the whole show so far, hasn't it? Very formulaic, but very well executed. So none of this, Doc Ock, we just keep going back to Spider-Man. There's a lot of stuff here that is very predictable, but not in a bad way. And I keep emphasizing this point because I feel like, if I might be so bold, if I can give an opinion for just a second. So I'm not a YouTuber. Anybody who knows me knows that I haven't been a YouTuber in years and years and years. I'm a streamer. But what I really am, more than even that, is I am an analyst. And if there's one thing that irritates me, it's when other people say they're analysts, but what they're really doing is kind of lowering general media literacy. Yes, I know that's a really elitist sounding statement, but I mean it. Because I have seen people, and seen people in comments, and seen people in other comments, and seen people in real life, who have used words and terminology in a way that is intended to be dismissive and insulting in ways that it probably shouldn't be. For example, oh, that's just predictable, or, oh, that's just formulaic, and you get it, right? There's nothing wrong with either of those two things as long as the execution is good, and it follows through on the narrative beats around it, right? It makes perfect sense that Jayce, who I remind you, was like a few seconds away from a suicide attempt, you're welcome, you two, and Viktor, who has had to push beyond the bounds of acceptability his entire life in order to get where he is, would be willing to do the, I'm going to do the desperate test on myself in order to be able to prove my theorem thing. After all, in addition to both of their character tropes lining up with this, the episodes have done a good job of establishing why they would do this. The circumstances, the environment, the level, for lack of a better way to put it, has been designed in such a way that it's obvious that this is pretty much their only path forwards, right? Like, Jayce has no life ahead of him, and Viktor is an assistant. He even says it. There's this brilliant, subtle part where he says, do you think I wanted to be an assistant for the rest of my life? Do you think this is the head of my... I forget how he phrases it, but do you think this is the only aspiration I have? The way he says it indicates just how much derision he holds for this. This is not... like, and it's worth noting that it's also implied that he has had to work his ass off to get to this job that he hates. It's very GTA 4 kind of a thing, actually. So of course they're going to go try and do the experimental testing. And of course they're going to do the late night robbery in order to do the dumb thing and just blah, blah, blah. Like, you get it, right? And yet, even though Viktor appears to be a very intelligent, capable, and competent individual, it doesn't matter. Why would it? So, this then cuts to another great scene. I cannot stop gushing about the animation in this show. Ekko comes to see Vi. Vi is obviously completely consumed with grief. We had an entire scene dedicated to that. But when Vi sees Ekko and sees how freaked out Ekko is, Vi has to take a moment, physically adjust herself, physically pull herself up in order to be able to then be the rock and support for Ekko. Because Ekko's freaking out and she has to be the adult now. And if you've been paying attention, she's been doing that since quite literally the first scene of the entire show. Out of there on that bridge. So even though she's suffering, she's like, okay, gotta be strong, gotta be strong. And I mentioned this as well because you get the vibes that Vander has been doing this as well, like for years. He's just gotten a lot more practiced at hiding it. So he goes, tries to confront Ekko. Because Benzo's dead. That's, yeah, okay, that's awful. I liked him. So holds Ekko, and Ekko mentions that Vander's actually still alive. And this knowledge physically galvanizes Vi. Like, she actually, her eyes change, and her expression changes, and the way she's sitting completely changes. This then cuts to Vander being dragged through the old fish factory, or whatever the hell Silco is having. His Bond villain lair. And this is a fascinating place. They're clearly producing a fairly large amount of things. Lots of the drug, lots of weapons. And we also see a lot of Deckard. And I was confused about this at first, but in hindsight, I think the reason they keep showing Deckard and how much he's barely dealing with the shimmer drug is specifically to show the effects of it so that we, the audience, are aware of how it's going to impact people later. It, after all, makes perfect sense why something happens at the end of this episode, given that we already have seen what shimmer does to someone who is fully healthy. Okay, so that's established. Cool. He also mentions something really, really quietly, just as a sideline, as he's speechifying to Vander. He mentions that the river toxins were seeping into an open wound. And, yeah, in real life, if you fell into the Thames, for example, with an open wound, you could probably die from that infection. Especially back in, say, I can't think of the name of it, not the Victorian era, the industrial era. I can't think of the name all of a sudden. The era of doom. God, help me out. Typified by the United Kingdom and, like, really awful, horrible factory working conditions. And oh god, this is going to bother me now. Like, Assassin's Creed Syndicate was set in the such and such era, and god, if I cannot think of the name of it. But yes, that does 100% explain why nobody even considers the idea of going ahead, getting into the water, and retrieving their stolen goods back in episode 1. I guess Victorian is correct. That's not what I was going for, but it doesn't matter. You know what I'm referring to. I believe it was the original inspiration for the steampunk vibe, actually. Don't quote me on that. Anyways, so Silco speechifies to Vander. I have nothing to say about the scene except for how awesome it is, and how much he is Vander's inverse. Vander and Silco both really wanted a better future once, and then things went very badly on a bridge. Now, we don't know the details. We don't need to. They don't need to sit and say, as you know, Vander. Again, good exposition top to bottom. Vander came out of it withdrawing more. Vander saw the cost of his revolution, and he withdrew. He wasn't willing to chop off his hand, metaphorically speaking. But Silco, he is not only willing to chop off his hand, he functionally already has, because of the wonderful thing with the eye. Silco is pushed to do even further extremes, to do even more, to do exactly what he needs to do. We see here, we see a lot here. There's so much. And obviously Silco has been kind of built up the whole arc, all 3 episodes so far. But this is really his character moment, when he really shows himself what he means. Yeah, freedom or death. I said earlier, not jokingly, that he's an Anders written properly, and I mean that. This is someone who has a cause and who is a true zealot. Not a believer, a zealot, the step past believer. Someone who says that anyone who is not completely with me to the extent I am is my enemy. And he is willing to do whatever is necessary in order to accomplish that. And the best part of all is, while Silco is obviously the villain here, and let's be clear, he's so understandable, isn't he? Because all we've seen, both top side and bottom side, has showcased exactly why this particular society is so broken. why it's falling apart, why it is not at the point where it is functional. Yeah, you'll die for the Undercity, but you won't fight for it. God, there's so many good individual lines here. Such wonderful stuff here. So, we cut back to Viktor and Jayce, and I can't help but notice that they keep using Viktor and Jayce as breather moments. They do this whole episode, actually. It's a little more lighthearted, a little more silly. There's some comedic moments. They're even like trying to break in, and this and Victor's like, "Oh, this isn't my room." Ha ha ha! Yeah, it's funny little stuff like that. And of course, there's Mel. Now, I fingered Mel. Let's rephrase that sentence. I identified Mel and her character in her very, very first scene, because this is an extremely good show that allows me to do something like that. Listen, I won't fingerprints, okay? Points if you get the specific reference. And I managed to identify Mel immediately. And her looking at this, of course she's going to go along with this. Of course she's going to allow this. Of course she wants to prove herself, and of course she wants to rise even higher than she is. Remember, the thing that we get overwhelmingly from her and from the few tiny tidbits we've gotten to the greater world is that Piltover is a small pond compared to the greater world out there. So, okay. There's also this line that Jayce gives to her, which says so much about how, I don't want to say stupid, unaware might be a good word, that Jayce really is. He says that they come from the land of progress, equality, and innovation. I cannot even help but notice that there's a lot of obvious comparisons that can be made between Piltover and Kirkwall, and I do not make that statement as an unkindness, rather as a compliment. Yeah, City of Progress. And yeah, he said that right next to Viktor, the cripple who has had to struggle for everything in his life. Anyways. So, then there's another really, really strong... Oh, God, imagine being so privileged as to not be aware of politics. I cannot imagine that. Milo and Clagger are... There's this great scene. Milo and Clagger are talking about divvying up some stuff in order to fight. We're going to fight. It's going to be great. And they're doing this while Powder is just freaking out over in the corner. Something that's been true the entire series is Powder is very much like Rainbow Dash. I know this sounds like a strange comparison, but please bear with me for a second. For those of you who haven't watched MLP, bear with me. For those of you who have watched MLP, I bet you're just sitting there going, oh yeah, because exactly, 1 HP. Rainbow Dash, for those of you who haven't watched MLP, is an interesting character because she comes across as loud and brash and obvious and a little bit silly and a little bit zany. But the truth is she has so few emotional defenses that the moment anything goes wrong, she's at 0 HP. Mentally, emotionally. And she crumbles almost immediately when things start to hit her badly. She is that close to just falling over at a moment's notice, so she maintains that facade to help defend herself. And we could go more down this analogy, because as was pointed out during the MLP Streaminations, Rainbow likes to have armor on top of her HP in order to try and prevent that from happening. And all of this is actually very well done in MLP. It's a great part of her character arc, which of course brings me to Powder. This scene is so brilliant. Powder is right there at one... Yeah, I noticed the name. Yeah, Powder Keg. I noticed the name. She is right there on the verge of falling apart at all times. Again, this goes all the way back to her first shot, all the way back in the bridge. And she's right there. And you just feel for her. And I admit, the Papa Bear uncle instincts are kicking in hard here, because I just want to give her a damn hug. Lord knows Vander knows what I'm talking about there. So... she's there, terrified, doesn't want to be left alone, Doesn't want to be uninvolved in the situation. Freaking out because Vi is gone and who knows what's going on. Everything's scary. And she's actually functionally at 0 HP in this scene. Now, the thing that makes this so fascinating is at first it seems like a total contrast between Milo, Clagor, and Powder. But actually, they're all in the same boat. They're just coping with it differently. Milo and Clagor are just trying to do what Rainbow usually does, actually. They're just glossing over it by looking at the toys and saying, this will be cool. You know, and we'll be able to fix this. We'll be able to do this. And Powder is over there just crying. She's already lost. She's functionally out of the fight, mentally and emotionally. Vi shows up. Vi tells them what's happening. Milo and Clagor immediately drop any pretenses of bravado or humor, and are like, all right, let's do this. What do we have to do? How do we go? Benzo's dead. They've taken Vander. We've got to go rescue him. And they just drop everything. But the thing is, it's interesting, is I can't quite give that to them, because almost all of the strength they derive there is from Vi. Vi is the one actually holding the team together, the Captain America equivalent, if you will, which is funny given her fighting style. Powder, same scene, right? Rewind a little bit. What does Powder do the moment Vi shows up? Glomps her. Literally tackle hugs her, like, oh, thank God. Thank God you're here. Thank God you're here. Then Vi goes to leave and tells Powder, you stay behind. I can't lose you. And of course, in lore, it's been, what, a few hours? Possibly not even that long since she got that speech from Vander about what are you willing to lose. And she was just willing to turn herself over in order to save Powder. So Vi, for all the logical, right, emotional reasons, decides to go ahead and leave Powder behind. However, from the perspective of a leader and the perspective of something more objective and cold, she probably should have just taken Powder with her. Instead, Powder stays behind, alone. Pause. Cut back to a breather moment. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Viktor doesn't even answer, by the way. Did you catch that? Viktor does not even answer. Are you sure you know what you're doing? What I find interesting about the scene where they're trying to stabilize the monocrystal is what they're doing is so logical and self-consistent. Something that I'm really big on, and I have been since the 90s, is internal consistency. I didn't have words for it. I didn't have terminology for it until like 2005 or something like that. But I have always said realism is not something I value in my fiction. It is believability, right? It's one of the first things I talked about in the show, too. Way back when I started talking about Voyager originally. You establish some rules in your fiction, stick with them, right? So this thing, what we know about this thing is it can release a large amount of magical energy, pretty much uncontained in an area, just, right? That's how it functions. So if you can shape that, if you can guide that, if you can direct that, but it also can be triggered by kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is just, right? There's a lot more that goes into kinetic energy. Just bear with me. Kinetic energy is... So, what they do is they put this thing into place, they spark it, and we also know that this thing happens to have greater than 100% efficiency, which means that when it's triggered, its triggering triggers more. It starts that cycle, which is such a thematic point of this entire first story arc. I don't know if it's going to continue the second or third one, but you get it here. So they get it, they trigger it, but then they have this entire device whose entire purpose is to then hold it in place while that's happening. Like, in fact, the whole thing operates very similarly to how I've seen electromagnets operate in real life. Not 100% because that involves running the electricity through it, but the same general idea applies. Keep it in place, get it going, and now we can harvest the energy. And once we've harvested the energy, or I'm saying that wrong, once the energy is present, then we can go ahead and manifest that energy. That's what the runes are for. So all of this is very consistent within the rules of how they've established this from episode 1 to 2 to 3. 100% the thumbs up on that. I wanted to give special praise to that. So, this then cuts back to Powder. Powder is sobbing and freaking out hard. Worst we've seen her to date. She's dying. She is bawling and having a legitimate ugly cry panic attack. Great way to put that. Anybody out there who's ever had a real panic attack, first of all, I apologize that you've had to suffer that. And second of all, you probably recognize this, because when you get into that level of panic attack, it's not great. It's unpleasant, right? It is very ugly. A lot of things are ugly about this show, in a good way, as weird as that probably sounds. So the frustration she portrays here is born of something I understand extremely well, and that is helplessness. Thus, it is entirely too horrifying that the thing that knocks her out of it is 4 words. I can help them. Cut to the attempt to rescue Vander. Obvious trap is obvious. I do like that they figured out on their own that it was a trap pretty quickly. Yeah, we just came in through the open. Oh. That's... okay. Nice little character bit from Milo. Pretty much the last character bit from Milo. There's this bit where Milo has his lockpick thing, and he's in there trying to get it through, and he's failing at it. If you remember all the way back in episode 1, he was also having trouble actually lockpicking. They mentioned he's the only one who actually learned how to lockpick, but they demonstrate that he's not very good at it. Either that he has confidence issues, or he's just not as practiced at it as he'd like. So he is starting to have an issue trying to lock him out. And yeah, Vander actually encourages him. It's like, okay, take a breath, breathe. You've got this, Milo. You've got this. And it's a nice little moment for Milo there. Clagor, meanwhile, the brute, the big heavy over there, is smashing his way, trying to get right through the wall, finds a weak point. Funny thing, that's actually how architecture works. No, seriously, a lot of brick and mortar, as in literal brick and mortar buildings, have certain parts of the building where, thanks to math and just general physics, there's parts that are weaker. So he's just smashing around, trying to find a spot where he can push his way through. It's a really, really minor touch, but it just shows the level of thought that was being put into this show, and I wanted to mention it. Something that Justified shared, if you remember. So, tension is really through the roof here. Silco gives the extremely overt threat of, I'm going to kill you and your children. Nice guy. This then leads to Vi grabbing the gauntlets and going out to face off against the thug. First of all, I love that she gives a proper pose when she's fighting the tattooed thug. Second of all, I like that Tattoo Man, I don't know if they ever give him a name, actually specifically looks back and double checks for orders from Silco. And Silco gives the nod before he goes ahead and comes in for the kill. And then, this is an absolutely freaking amazing action sequence. It does like 3 things right here. More like 17, but 3 things I want to call attention to. First of all, a lot of her moves, once again, I already pointed this out in the previous thing, are pretty solidly boxing moves. There's a lot of technical movement in how she's doing her footwork and how she's balancing her weight and her stances. She is so much smaller and so much skinnier than the people she's fighting that she has to do that. But as anybody who's actually practiced martial arts will tell you, including Savakam if she was here, being small and skinny doesn't prevent you from hitting really, really hard. You just have to know how to do it. If I might be so bold, if I can digress for just a second, there's this thing that I think fiction has pushed a little bit too much, that you can't be like a big, guy, unless you're a big guy with a big arm like me in real life, then that punch isn't going to do anything. But my niece, if I taught her proper stance and posture and follow through, could hit really, really hard, because there's physics involved, because there's technique involved. And it's not like she isn't also having 2 giant metal gauntlets in her hand, which she's using the momentum of in order to carry her. In several cases, her punches actually carry her so hard that she has trouble recovering from them in time to deal with the next attacker. And, as ISD just pointed out, it's not like she just crushes them effortlessly. This is a fight. She has to push here. And yeah, she loses her balance a lot. I mean, I don't know how heavy those metal gauntlets are, but, like, I'm not going to go grab them, but imagine if I just grabbed one of my 30 pounders, right? Yeah, just get some cast irons right there, and try to picture doing this while carrying those dumbbells. Or miraculously, don't physically do that unless there's nothing in front of you regret losing, because it would be really easy to have that slip right out of your hand. And, well, yeah, don't do that. So that's point number one. It does very well. The technique and the presentation, the animation, the choreography. Point number two, they're on a narrow bridgeway. Now, this is actually smart twice, so it's actually two things. Something that fiction has a big problem with, especially bad fiction, is there's 15 guys and there's one person, and the 15 guys are like, "Rawr!" And then one person at a time, and then the next person, and then the next person, and then the next person. But no, actually, the bottleneck actually works really, really well. It is an extremely advantageous thing to do, and if you're paying attention, they don't always come at her one at a time. Sometimes they do manage to outmaneuver her as she just starts to get overwhelmed towards the middle and later ends of the fight. So, bottleneck probably helped, for being honest with ourselves. The third thing, though, is the obvious symbolism on display here. I could mention the fact that League of Legends is all about laning, and the fact that they're from the lanes, but that's not actually the direction I'm going with. Although it was my first thought, I'll admit it. But she's fighting on a bridge. Appropriate. So she's doing she's pushing, and for being honest, she would have lost this fight. In fact, she actually did lose this fight. The only reason it went as well for her is because Silco was more or less deliberately holding back, which, yeah. Then Silco sends in Deckard, and that's pretty much the end of that. I do love it, though. Vi is the tank holding the line. Milo is the rogue, breaking him out of the chains. Clagor is finding the escape route. So Shimmered Deckard goes in. This is actually the very first time that we see a full view of Shimmered Deckard. In fact, what's really funny about this is he takes it and he turns all purpley and veiny, but he actually gets worse over time. Did you notice that? As the fight's progressing, as he moves forward, he gets worse and more mutated and more asymmetrical as parts of him bulbous out more than the others. So she does the best she can to hold off against Deckard, but Deckard's just, he's on another level. That's how Shimmer works. Okay, I'm with that. Great cost, great benefit. Okay. So, tension continues to hold high here. There's this moment of tension as they're holding off Deckard just barely, and Vander says, "You did good." Gives one little breath, one little tiny beat in the increasing tension before we cut off to Heimerdinger. God, I'm going to get his pronunciation one of these days. Who's trying to stop Jayce and Viktor. Now, they go ahead, they finish creating the thing, they have this spectral map thing going on. And of course Mel was there the entire time. Why wouldn't she be? After all, this is her play, and she's going to be pushing against the council, and we know already just how politically corrupt the council is. So perhaps it's time for the era of Hextech. Yeah, that doesn't sound like an ominous statement at all. So, then we see a wonderful interplay of some fantastic visual cinematography. We see Wilo picking the lock, and then we cut to almost the exact same shot, but in a different area completely, of Powder winding up the clockwork monkey. We see Clagor, trying to keep all these names straight in my head, trying to smash through the wall, having successfully found a weak spot, while Deckard is trying to smash through the door. And there's this interplay of quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud. What's really messed up about all of this is that as we're presenting it, as we're showcasing it, they would have gotten away probably scot-free. Like, obviously, this wouldn't be a universal win because Silco would still be out there and Deckard would still be out there. But they could have successfully escaped and rescued Vander if Powder wasn't there. They had pretty much made it. Um, and Grayson would still be dead. Yeah, it doesn't change anything. So that's the situation. It's not like the situation would be better, but it would probably be less bad. But I wanted to talk about Powder's bomb for just a second, because there's this thing that I hope none of you have ever experienced. It's called desperation. And when you're desperate, you do really dumb things. You do things that aren't really thought out. You do things that are not really well designed. You do things that, in hindsight, you look back and think, why the hell did I do that? Really think about... That's a good way to put that, Lord Harriman. Really think about the bomb that she made. It's actually brilliant in a really crude way. You've got the little mana thing here, and you've got the toy, which goes boop, introducing kinetic energy, once again being self-consistent with the technology and the rules of the setting. But the thing is, while that makes perfect sense, everything else about what she did makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Now, I'm not blaming her. This is not bad writing. She's probably in the middle of fighting off the high of the panic attack that she barely recovered from. And she's clearly in a hurry because, you know, there's a monster over there trying to kill her family. But how many of you have ever done any work whatsoever in any kind of explosive design or demolitions? Because the single most important thing to do when it comes to explosive, this is true, is how you shape the explosive to contain the detonation. So there's a whole lot of design that goes into that, where literally down to the physical shape of the bomb, or in some cases how a missile can carry it, or how an actual physical casing can contain the bomb. You want to do stuff to make sure that the explosion either hits the right type of area, the right size of area, or the right shape of the area. All she did was create a bomb, completely uncontrolled and unrestrained, that just kind of goes in all directions. She doesn't know the yield, she doesn't know the direction, she doesn't know the shape, she knows nothing. So what then happens is exactly what you'd expect. It goes out and we see the first explosion. And the first explosion naturally causes a lot of issues. And then we see the second explosion, and then the third explosion, and then the fourth explosion. And the whole time, I'm just wincing. I'm just wincing as I'm watching this here. Just like, oh my god. Oh my god. So scientist guy is dead. Silco is flung, nearly disintegrated. What's-her-face, the peasant leader, literally loses her arm, shoving him out of the way. Disintegrates her arm. Clagor is dead. So, that's cool. Wylo is impaled. Civica, apparently. Wylo is impaled and then crushed to death. Or Milo? I keep writing down Wylo. Whatever. He's dead, though. I don't have to say his name ever again because he's dead. Thank God. Oof. Vander... At this point, Silco has had enough, and he just says, go kill them. Vander comes out with just 2 metal knuckles, and this is when they really show what I predicted all the way back in the first episode, if you were paying attention, that this dude knows how to fight. Unlike the earlier fight with Vi, where she was barely holding on, Vander crushes. Just curb stomps everything, except for Deckard. And even Deckard, he still does a pretty good job with. Which makes sense. He's a much bigger guy, much stronger guy, and probably a lot more skilled than the flailing Deckard. So, yeah, no, that tracks. It's also the first time in the entire episode where Silco shows any real fear. But then, nice moment between Vander and Silco. Silco stabs him, throws him over, down into the pit, and Vander, who, like, continuing that theme of how far are you willing to go, Vander, knowing this is probably going to kill him, grabs the vial. We don't even see it happen. We don't need to, because he just comes up and he is the goddamned Hulk. Once again, this is self-consistent. Deckard, if you remember, is this scrawny little nobody kid, right? Like, skinnier than my arm. Just a dinky little dude who turns into this big monster. Vander's a bulk, right? Like, he is this big, muscular, powerful guy whose main form of attack is his freaking punches. So he turns into a much bigger foe and a much bigger enemy. And Silco is just like, oh, okay. So Shimmered Vander freaking kills Deckard. Yeah. Also, I'm sorry, I actually missed a step. There was actually one little detail. I'm going through this. Yeah, just in one grab, just bam, that's the end of him. I should probably mention that Deckard had lost HP already from Vi and from the explosion, but still, yeah, no, Vander was going to crush him. We all knew that was coming. I have to mention something, though. You remember how earlier I mentioned, in episode 2, I mentioned how strange it was that they did this direct comparison between the bracelet. Bracer? No, we'll go with bracer. The bracer that Vander had, and he said, you know, there's worse things. And then the bracer that Jayce used. Now, we know what Jayce's bracer is, but I always questioned why they had that significance. In this episode, we see that's the spot where he was cut. That's the spot where Silco. For Silco got him. That's where Silco cut Vander, and now we have context for why that was so significant, and the same general impetus. It is exactly what I thought it was. It was thematically connected to what happened to Jayce, not literally connected. So, Vander has a moment to decide to kill Silco. Probably could have. Decides not to go save Vi. Of course he does. Everything he's been doing this entire show has been to save Vi. So, this literally means that his first, second, and third final acts as a living person were to save his kids. So, Vander dies. Powder. Vi has been spending the entire show to date trying to be the adult and partially succeeding at it. Vi can't here. She can't. She absolutely cannot manage this. She loses it. Acts out grief and pain and says the worst possible thing. Finally breaks, yeah. She finally breaks and just can't deal with this anymore. Yeah, you're a jinx. And of course she is. I don't blame her at all, but what's really messed up is that this could have been the end. Like, they could have just done that, and I think most of us wouldn't have really questioned that. In the moment, we say unpleasant things. But what's really, really interesting is that Vi then did something. And yes, she actually physically hit her. But after that, Vi did something. She runs away, but not very far. That actually makes a weirdly large amount of sense. An enormous quantity of fiction forgets that one of the simplest and most effective ways to get out of being in the moment is to pause. And one of the easiest ways to pause is distance. So she just has to go over, cool off, gather herself. And everything about the show, the framing, the distance, how she reacts when Silco shows up, everything shows that she had every intention of turning right back around and grabbing Powder and getting the hell out of her. Of course, she's not actually going to abandon her. Powder's flipping out because she's now having a total panic attack because her sister just yelled at her and because, you know, she's just been abandoned again. Then Marcus grabs her. One of the things I find fascinating is how much of history, both real life and fictional, hinges on tiny little things. Like a guy deciding to get a sandwich at his favorite sandwich shop. Points if you know the reference. It's a real life one. I'll give that away. Or another one which I am very proud of pointing out is in World of Warcraft. In Legion, a tremendous amount of the Warcraft history hinges on the fact that a single warden decided to go ahead and help a single archmage in finding a single artifact and was corrupted by it and then ended up helping Gul'dan. Whole lot of really tiny little moments can completely change history, and I have a feeling we just witnessed one of those. Because if I was able to go back, But who knows? Instead, Marcus grabs her, knocks her out. Not sure why. He says he'll kill you. And that's, yeah, he's just witnessed the dude have 2 people killed right in front of him, so that tracks. But it does make me wonder what his motive there is, and I do hope to look forward to that in the future. But then Powder tackle hugs the only person there, Silco, out of what can only be referred to as sheer emotional desperation. And Silco is actually legitimately shocked about it. Did you notice that? He's been a cold fish this whole time, and he approaches her with the knife. Even when he puts it behind his thing, he still has the knife in his hand. He's like, "Where's your sister? Because I need to kill you." Mwahaha. But when she tackle hugs him, he is wide-eyed. He's just... And he doesn't know how to deal with that. And then she mentions that she's been abandoned by her sister, which leads him to then look up at Vander. And now, in addition to the obvious basic human empathy, he now has a specific point of sympathy for her. So he reaches up the hand to hold her. We will show them. We'll show them all. Grayson, Benzo, Clagor, Milo, Deckard, Vander, dead. And that's the end of the first act. Yeah, his own crew was pretty shocked by that action, too. So I'm thinking Lamentation status for this. What are y'all thinking? We do like below... What's below Lamentation status? Like... We'll call it Starfield. We'll call it the Starfield color. Oh my god. What's above purple? Nothing's above purple. That's the point. Purple itself is pretty hard to reach. By design. We've looped! We've looped! It's double purple! No. I think I agree with the crowd on this one. I was actually hesitant. It really is hard to reach purple into this system. That's why I said, you know, green through red, that's the norms, right? Red is usually the ceiling. It takes a lot to push something up into purple territory, but this... Yeah, no, this I think qualifies. The extra added emotional impact is certainly powerful, but more importantly, the way they use that emotional impact, the way they built up to it, the way they paid off for it. The fact that this is such a logical and brilliant payoff of 2 full episodes of everything. The voice acting, the animation, all the stuff that makes it fantastic, but that extra little oomph is how well constructed all 3 episodes are, which, like we talked about with Lord of the Rings, adds a whole lot of extra power to the conclusory point, right? To the payoff. This is a hell of a payoff episode, and pretty much all of the story stuff that's been happening up until this point is paid off here. And I think... the... what, Ice Frost? Hang on. Just going back to the first episode. Oh! Yeah, no, I did actually notice that she jinxes every job. And yeah, I noticed that Vi used that same insult on her as her Potiphar thing. Just, whew. Yeah. No, this is fantastic, and you can see. So, real quick, before we cut off, I think we will cut off for the day. I could probably squeeze in one more episode. Let's not push it. Plus, my throat's kind of dying because I spent the last 2 days reading a book on camera. For those of you who are interested, I also like the idea of doing this in 3-episode chunks. So we could do this week, next week, if that's good with everyone. For those of you who are interested, and this is just for fun, we have the guessing game, and of course, that's its own thing. But if you pull up the guessing game, you'll notice that I have a thing on the guesses on, guesses on score, question mark, there we go, and I've got Arcane right there. If you're paying attention there, in the actual Streamination sheet, I am keeping track of a running total of the score, and we're going to go ahead and tally that up. So blue is 1, green is 2, yellow is 3, orange is 4, red is 5, purple is 6, and of course black is 0. So in other words, what this question really boils down to is a numerical expression of how many, reds, purples, oranges, yellows, greens, and blues do you think we're going to see for a specific show. So you're more than welcome to participate. I'm actually pretty curious myself. I'm wondering if we're going to have anything less than red at this point. Jesus Christ. I don't want to get too optimistic, but damn, what a hell of a first act. I'm also probably going to... So, do me a favor. I noticed several people have just putting numbers, except for ISD. Thank you, ISD and 040, for noticing what I already mentioned last time. Do me a favor and put the specific show you're guessing for, because tomorrow we're going to start covering Clone Wars Season 7. And the significance of that is because we will with 100% certainty finish Season 7 of Clone Wars before we get back to Arcane. We might finish Andor before we get back to Arcane at this point. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not plotting it out like that. So like put in like a show name and then guess. Make sense? So like Arcane 53 or Clone Wars Season 7 20 Arcane 53 or whatever, right? Just to make it nice and organized for me, please and thank you. Someone asked, what's the max score? Why don't I give me a second here. Because this is actually pretty easy to figure out. I could... So, the possibility here is actually pretty easy. A 9 times 6, which is 54, I want to say. But then I'm going to do this for the rest of these, too. So, this is 12 episodes. So, 6 times 12 is 72. And then Andor would also be 72. And then Mandalorian is 16 episodes. What's 16 times 6? That's a little harder. What's 8 times 6? It's 5 times 6. Okay, so that's 30. Plus 18, so that's 48. Plus 60, so that's 108, I want to say. That's how I do math in my head. By the way, I was talking about that to my niece recently. Because they teach math completely differently nowadays. So I break it down. That's how my math... I'm pretty sure I'm wrong there. Hang on. 16... 96. I was off by 10. 96. Wait, that doesn't sound right. Hang on. Nope, I'm right. It is 96. I was off by 12, actually. My bad. Edge Runners will be 10, so that's easy. And then the DKC show's best possible score is 0. No, I'm joking. That would be funny, though, wouldn't it? That'll be actually 24. I should double check all of these. Hang on. There we go. Okay, so there's our best possibles. I'll go and extend this to make this nice and neat looking. There we go. That's true. That's true. We know that it cannot be the max because we already have 2 reds. But there's your range, right? I'm not saying 0 to 72 because it's always 0 to 72, right? It's always 0 to whatever. Although unlikely, that is the highest possibility is nothing but Lamentations. Yeah, the current possible max is 52. Which I noticed Nerazaz has already guessed more than that. Optimistic. Anyways, that's just for fun, if you feel like it. Again, tomorrow, starting roughly at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, variable depending on real life, we'll go ahead and start Clone Wars Season 7, Episode 1, The Bad Batch. See you there.